He's one of the most famous dwarves of all the Third Age, known for his fighting, his ferocity, and most of all, his friendships. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the life of Gimli. Gimli, son of Glóin, was born in 2879 of the Third Age, in the Blue Mountains west of the Shire. At this time, the dwarves have lived in Thorin's halls for 77 years. Thorin, who takes over as king in exile in 2850, would rule throughout Gimli's early life. In 2941, Gimli's father Glóin would accompany the king on the quest of Erebor. As for Gimli, the 62-year-old dwarf was considered too young to join the company on this dangerous mission. Later that year, the quest of Erebor is a success, as the dwarves reclaim their home with the death of Smaug. Sometime in the following years, Gimli would travel east to live with his father in the Lonely Mountain, now under the rule of Thorin's cousin, King Dain Ironfoot. In 2989, Gimli's cousin Balin forms an expedition to reclaim Moria. While Gimli once again remains at home, Balin is joined by many other dwarves, including Ori and Gimli's uncle, Owen. Decades later, in 3017, Gimli is 138 years old. At this time, a messenger of Sauron comes to speak with King Dain. This messenger, likely one of the Nazgûl, comes to ask about Bilbo Baggins and the Ring of Power. He promises great reward in return, including the deliverance of the realm of Moria. Dain sends the messenger off with no answer and decides to send messengers to Rivendell. Glóin and his son Gimli embark on the journey, seeking the counsel of Elrond, and also to warn Bilbo of the dangerous forces searching for him. They likely make their way via the High Pass. Glóin would later say that the Beornings had kept the passage from Dale to Rivendell possible through their valiant deeds against the forces of darkness. As chance would have it, the dwarves arrive in Rivendell in time to take part in the Council of Elrond, where they tell the story of the messenger. As Gimli is the only young fighting-age dwarf at the council, he is selected to represent his race in the Fellowship of the Ring. The Fellowship departs Rivendell on December 25th, 3018, making their way along the western side of the Misty Mountains. Along the way, Gimli shows the group his knowledge of the mountain range, declaring he doesn't need a map, and proceeds to name each of the mountains individually by their Khuzdul or dwarvish names. After the failed attempt to cross Caradhras, Gimli sides with Gandalf regarding whether the Fellowship should pass through Moria. He is no doubt curious at this time to learn what happened to Balin, as the dwarves of Erebor had not heard from the colony in Moria in years. As the group comes to the doors of Durin, Gimli and Legolas get into an argument over whether it was the fault of the dwarves or the elves that the friendship between the two races deteriorated. Later, Gimli truly has his time to shine as the group travels the long dark of Moria. He walks at the front of the group with Gandalf, counseling the wizard when their path is uncertain. Finally, on January 15th, Gimli discovers the tragic fate of his cousin. The Fellowship comes to the Chamber of Mazarbul, where they discover Balin's tomb. Gimli fights fiercely in the battle that follows in the chamber, defending his cousin's resting place from being defiled by the orcs of Moria. Later, we see the most open expression of despair we will ever see from Gimli, as the mysterious enemy pursuing the Fellowship is revealed to be a Balrog. Gimli drops his axe and puts his face in his hands, knowing this is surely Durin's bane, which had brought an end to the once great dwarf kingdom. As Gandalf stays behind to face off with the Balrog, Gimli once again takes the lead position, guiding the Fellowship over the bridge of Khazad-dûm to safety. After Gandalf falls and the group makes their way out of the mountain, they come near the Kheled Zaram, also known as the Miromir. Gimli takes Frodo to this lake, which is of great significance to the dwarves. According to legend, after the very first dwarves awoke at Mount Gundabad, Durin I, also known as Durin the Deathless, made his way south and came to this very lake. As he looked in the lake, he saw reflected in the water a crown of stars above his head. The amazing thing about this is that it was during the day, when the stars should not have been visible. Taking this as a sign, Durin settled in those very mountains, founding the realm of Khazad-dûm. As Gimli and Frodo peer into the lake, they see the very stars of Durin's crown. The group proceeds to the Realm of Lorien, where, as we discussed in my video on Legolas, Gimli is told he must wear a blindfold. The dwarf stubbornly refuses and says he will only do so if Legolas would be made to wear one as well. After Aragorn declares the entire group will be blindfolded, they make their way to Calas Galadhon, the main city of Lorien. As the Fellowship is greeted by Galadriel and Celeborn, the Lady of Lorien sympathizes with Gimli even as her husband rebukes him. "Alas," said Celeborn, "we long have feared that under Caladhras a terror slept. But had I known that the dwarves had stirred up this evil in Moria again, I would have forbidden you to pass the northern borders, you and all that went with you. And if it were possible, I would say that at last Gandalf fell from wisdom into folly, going needlessly into the net of Moria." "He would be rash indeed that said that thing," said Galadriel gravely. "Needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life." She goes on to say, "Dark is the water of Keled-Zaram, and cold are the springs of Kibil-Nala, and fair were the many-pillared halls of Khazad-dûm in elder days, before the fall of the mighty kings beneath the stone." And the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes. And it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy and saw their love and understanding. Wonder came into his face, and then he smiled in answer. He rose clumsily and bowed in dwarf fashion, saying, "Yet more fair is the living land of Lorien, and the Lady Galadriel is above all the jewels that lie beneath the earth." This brings silence among the group. We should keep in mind that it has likely been thousands of years since kind words were exchanged between this group of elves and the dwarves. Celeborn apologizes to Gimli for his harsh words. After a month's respite in Lorien, the group makes ready to set off once again. As Galadriel gives gifts to the Fellowship, she asks Gimli what a dwarf would ask of the elves. He requests a single strand of Galadriel's hair. Galadriel asks what he would do with such a gift, to which the dwarf responds, "Treasure it, lady," he answered, "in memory of your words to me at our first meeting. And if ever I return to the smithies of my home, it shall be set in imperishable crystal to be an heirloom of my house, and a pledge of goodwill between the mountain and the wood until the end of days." Unbeknownst to Gimli, this is actually a very significant request. If you've seen my Galadriel video, you know that it was the great elf craftsman Feanor who requested 3 times that Galadriel give him a strand of her hair. Galadriel, perceiving a darkness within the elf, refused him all 3 times. To Gimli, who had requested a single strand, she gifts 3. She goes on to admit that the future is uncertain, though she foretells that if good should prevail, Gimli's hands shall flow with gold, and yet over him gold shall have no dominion. On February 16th, as the Fellowship leaves Lorien, Gimli openly weeps at the parting, saying that the light was even more dangerous than the darkness he had originally feared. By the time the group leaves Lorien, Gimli and Legolas have become unlikely friends, in large part due to Galadriel's kindness toward the dwarf and his courtesy toward her. Gimli would later be known as Elf Friend, a rare title given by the elves to those providing special assistance or alliance toward their kind. After the Fellowship is broken at Amon Hen, Gimli helps Aragorn and Legolas lay Boromir to rest in the Anduin. They track the orcs northwest through the lands of Rohan. On February 30th, they meet Éomer and his Éored, who are on their way back to Edoras after killing the Uruks of Saruman. The rider looked at them with renewed wonder, but his eyes hardened. "Then there is a lady in the Golden Wood, as old tales tell," he said. "Few escape her nets, they say. These are strange days. But if you have her favor, then you also are net weavers and sorcerers, maybe." He turned a cold glance suddenly upon Legolas and Gimli. "Why do you not speak, silent ones?" he demanded. Gimli rose and planted his feet firmly apart. His hand gripped the handle of his axe, and his dark eyes flashed. "Give me your name, horsemaster, and I will give you mine, and more besides." "As for that," said the rider, staring down at the dwarf, The stranger should declare himself first. Yet I am Eomer, son of Eomund, and am called the third Marshal of the Riddermark.
Then, Eomer, son of Eomund, third Marshal of the Riddermark, let Gimli the dwarf, Glóin's son, warn you against foolish words. You speak evil of that which is fair beyond the reach of your thought, and only little wit can excuse you.
Eomer's eyes blazed, and the men of Rohan murmured angrily and closed in, advancing their spears. I would cut off your head, beard and all, Master Dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground, said Eomer. He stands not alone, said Legolas, bending his bow and fitting an arrow with hands that moved quicker than sight. You would die before your stroke fell. Luckily, Aragorn intervenes and helps all to realize that they should be allies, not enemies. Eomer gives them 2 horses and they proceed to Fangorn to search for the missing hobbits. There, they would meet Gandalf, who they initially believed to be Saruman. As with Legolas and Aragorn, Gimli receives a message from Galadriel when Gandalf reveals himself. To Gimli, son of Glóin, give his lady's greeting. Lock-a-bearer, where thou goest, my thought goes with thee, but have a care to lay thine axe to the right tree. Gimli is heartened by this message, singing loudly in dwarf tongue.
Come, come,
he shouted, swinging his axe.
Since Gandalf's head is now sacred, let us find one that is right to cleave.
Later, when the group is in Erebor, Wormtongue speaks ill of the Lady of the Golden Wood as well, once again pushing Gimli into a rage, though he is quickly calmed by Gandalf. After Theoden is healed, Gimli would accompany the group to Helm's Deep. During the ensuing battle, he would save Eomer's life outside the gates and begin a contest with Legolas to see who would reach a higher count of enemies slain. When the wall is breached, Gimli is the first to come to the culvert, leaping off the wall and into the midst of the orcs of Isengard. As the battle progresses, Gimli is among a group that is forced back into the glittering caves behind the fortress. Overwhelmed by the beauty and magnificence of these caves, he makes a pact after the battle with Legolas. Should they survive the battles to come, Legolas will accompany Gimli to the glittering caves, and Gimli will accompany Legolas to Fangorn Forest. Gimli also bests his friend in their final tally, 42 to 41. The victorious party rides to parley with Saruman. While many of the Rohirrim are moved by the magic within Saruman's words, Gimli is not, saying Saruman's words cannot be trusted, and that what Saruman calls help would truly mean ruin. Saruman is angered enough by Gimli's words that he loses his composure for a moment, breaking his fair visage. After the parley, Gimli accompanies Aragorn, Legolas, and the Grey Company to the Paths of the Dead. As they come to the Dark Door, or the Gate of the Dead, Gimli is very reluctant to proceed. However, the thought of a dwarf being bested by an elf underground drives him to go through the door. Gimli travels with Aragorn and the army of the dead as they commandeer the ships from the Corsairs. As we learned in my last video, it is here at Pelargir where Legolas hears the sound of gulls, leading his heart to no longer belong to the woods, but the sea. Tolkien states that Gimli fears for his friend, saying,
If all the fair folk take to the havens, it will be a duller world for those who are doomed to stay.
He knows now that whether by battle or the call of the sea, eventually he will have to say goodbye to his friend. Making their way up the river, the group comes to the Battle of Pelennor Fields, where Gimli would once again put his axe to use. After their victory, Aragorn assembles his forces and they march to the Black Gate. Gimli fights alongside his friends in the Battle of the Morannon, and after the ring is destroyed and the day won, he is the one to find Pippin, who is laying bruised but alive among a hill of the dead. Gimli joyfully meets Sam, Frodo, and Pippin at the celebration at the Field of Cormallen. Like Legolas and the hobbits, Gimli stays in Gondor for the coronation of King Elessar. Eomer, who Gimli had earlier pledged to fight if he did not concede that Galadriel was fairest in all the world, begs the dwarf's pardon for his earlier words. Though, he confesses that he cannot call Galadriel the fairest, as he believes Queen Arwen to be the most fair. Gimli is content with this, and he and Eomer remain friends ever after. As the group travels north, they stop at Erebor for King Theoden's funeral, then come to Helm's Deep, where Legolas views the glittering caves. The group then comes to Isengard, where the Fellowship would come to its end. Gandalf and the hobbits ride north to Rivendell, Aragorn returns to his kingdom, and Gimli accompanies Legolas to the forest of Fangorn. Eventually, Gimli returns to his home of Erebor, which has been deeply affected by the Northern War, in which Easterlings had marched on Dale and the Lonely Mountain in the service of Sauron. While the men and dwarves were victorious, King Dain had perished in the fight. Thorin III, known as Stonehelm, is now king under the mountain. Gimli's father Glóin, however, is still alive and well, no doubt learning of his son's great deeds in the War of the Ring. Years later, Glóin would die in the year 15 of the Fourth Age. We don't know when, but at some point in the early Fourth Age, possibly after his father's death, Gimli leads a group of dwarves back to the south. They settle at the Glittering Caves, which are also known by the name Aglarond, or Caves of Glory. Gimli now leads his people as the Lord of the Glittering Caves. In the year 20 of the Fourth Age, Legolas and his group of elves settle in Ithilien. Together, the elves of Ithilien and the dwarves of Aglarond help rebuild the great city of Minas Tirith, Gimli's people remaking the Great Gate using mithril and steel. During this time in Minas Tirith, Gimli is reunited with Merry and Pippin, as the hobbits were visiting the king. At this time, Gimli tells the hobbits the history of his people and lays out the genealogy for the dwarves of Erebor, which the hobbits place in the Red Book. We ourselves can read these very works, as they are located in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings. Gimli spends his remaining days in Middle-earth, ruling the realm of the Glittering Caves. And while great riches would flow from his realm, these treasures would have no sway over him. Above all others, he treasured only the locket containing the 3 strands of Galadriel's hair. With Aragorn's passing in 120 of the Fourth Age, the time has come and Legolas is called by the sea to sail west to Valinor. However, despite his fear from years before, Gimli would not have to face a Middle-earth without the fair folk or his greatest friend. For Legolas would bring Gimli, now 262 years old, with him on the voyage west. He is the only dwarf ever permitted to come to the realm of Aman. There, Gimli, like Frodo, Bilbo, and Sam before him, would live out the remainder of his mortal days in the Blessed Realm with his friend Legolas, and very likely seeing the Lady Galadriel once again. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, Tom DeBombadil 19, Gail Elizabeth, Jim Limber Davis, Sky Carcass, Salim Rahman, Smorzerk, Zetrock, Gimilkad, Grand Strategy Nerd, Debbie, Chief 40123, and Mid-Earth Wellness. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.